I wasn't looking for anything that afternoon. That's the part I keep coming back to. I wasn't searching. I wasn't hoping. I wasn't in one of those quiet, dangerous moods where loneliness makes you dig through old things just to feel something. I was just looking for the park map, the one Paula had printed and folded and tucked somewhere in the side pocket of the canvas tote bag she always carried. The one with the faded wildflower print and the fraying strap she kept saying she'd replace and never did. She had stepped away for a moment. Just a moment. To answer her phone, I think, or to throw away the paper cup from her coffee. I don't remember exactly. What I remember is the bag sitting on the bench beside me, the afternoon light coming through the trees at that low, golden angle it gets in late October, and me reaching inside without thinking. My fingers found the folded map, and then they found something else. A piece of paper, small, tucked between the map and a lip balm and a transit card, and all the ordinary things a person carries without thinking. I pulled it out. I didn't mean to. Or maybe I did. But I told myself I didn't. It was a photograph, printed on regular paper, slightly creased along one edge, the way something gets when it's been folded and unfolded too many times. The image was small, maybe the size of a playing card, and it was a picture of me. Not a recent one. It must have been from 2, maybe 3 years ago. From a birthday dinner for our friend Cassie, the one where we'd all ended up staying too late and laughing too loud and walking home through the cold instead of calling a car because none of us wanted the night to end. In the photo, I was mid-laugh. My head was thrown back slightly, my eyes were almost closed, and I was holding a glass of something. Sparkling water, probably, because I hadn't been drinking much that year. I looked completely unaware that anyone was taking my picture. I didn't know this photo existed. I sat there on that park bench with the afternoon light going golden around me, and a photograph of myself in my hands, and I felt something shift inside my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. Paula's footsteps came back along the gravel path. I heard them before I saw her. I folded the photograph back along its crease. I slipped it between the map and the lip balm, exactly where I'd found it. I zipped the bag closed. When she sat down beside me and asked if I'd found the map, I said yes. I gave her the map. I didn't say anything about the photograph, but I thought about it for the rest of the afternoon, and that night, and for a long time after that. This is the story of what I did with what I found. Paula and I had been friends for 4 years by the time of that walk in the park. 4 years sounds like a long time. In some ways it was. In other ways, the afternoon I'm about to tell you about, I realized I had spent almost all of those 4 years looking at her and never actually seeing her. Not the way you see someone when you finally stop being careful about where you let your eyes land. We met at a design agency in Brooklyn where we both worked. She was already there when I arrived. One of those people who seems to have been in a place forever, who knows where the good coffee is and which printer jams and whose desk not to sit at even if it looks empty. My first week, she appeared at my desk with a list of practical information written on a Post-it note. The code to the supply closet, the name of the IT person who actually answered emails, the Thai place on the next block that did a lunch special on Tuesdays. And she said, "You're going to need these," with the calm confidence of someone who had already decided to be useful to me before I'd asked. I thanked her. She nodded, like it was nothing, and went back to her desk. I kept the Post-it for months. We became friends the way coworkers sometimes do, slowly and practically at first. Lunch together when the timing worked out, a walk to the coffee cart when we both needed air. A shared eye roll across a conference room table during a meeting that should have been an email. By the end of my first year there, she was the person I texted when something funny happened, and the person I complained to when something didn't. She knew the name of my cat, who I was worried about at home, and what I ordered when I couldn't decide. I knew her coffee order by heart, and which deadlines made her go quiet, and the fact that she got cold easily, and always kept an extra layer folded over the back of her chair. These are the small intimacies of friendship, the tiny architecture of knowing someone. I thought that's what it was. For a long time, I thought that's all it was. Paula is, the kind of person who makes you feel more like yourself when you're around her. Not because she's loud or energetic or always doing something interesting, although she can be those things, but because she pays attention. She listens in a way that's different from most people. Not waiting for her turn to talk, but actually listening, tracking the thing you said 2 sentences ago. Noticing when you skip over something. Asking the follow-up question that you didn't know you needed someone to ask. It's disarming. The first few times, I remember thinking, why is she paying such close attention? It made me slightly nervous. It made me want to say something worth the attention. Over time, I stopped noticing the nervousness. I just got used to feeling more articulate around her, more alive to my own thoughts. She was funny too. Not performatively funny. Not the kind of person who announces their own jokes. She was funny quietly. In the margin, in the aside. A word here, a look there. The kind of humor that makes you feel like you're in on something. Outside of work, we expanded slowly. A museum on a Saturday. A farmer's market on a Sunday. A movie that one of us had seen and wanted the other to see, then talking about it for the whole walk home. Her apartment was in Carroll Gardens, mine was in Crown Heights, and neither of us minded the distance, which said something, though at the time I didn't think too hard about what. I didn't have a lot of close friendships. I'd had them before, the kind from college, from childhood, from jobs you leave and drift from. But by the time Paula and I became friends, I was in a quieter chapter. Not lonely, exactly. More like selective. I'd gotten careful about who I let close, and I didn't examine that carefulness much. Paula was the exception I made without quite deciding to make it. Our friend group overlapped slightly. Cassie, who worked in publishing and always knew the best new restaurant before it became the best new restaurant. Her girlfriend Diane, who was a physical therapist and the most practical person I'd ever met. Sometimes B, who was Paula's friend from college and visited from Philadelphia a few times a year, loud and warm, and somehow always wearing exactly the right outfit. I liked them. But Paula was different. Paula was mine, in the way that a particular friendship can feel like it belongs to you, even when you can't explain the possession. I told myself it was because she was easy to be around. I told myself it was because she was the kind of friend you didn't have to perform for. I told myself a lot of things over 4 years, and most of them were true enough to be convincing. The park was her idea. The specific park, Prospect Park, on a Tuesday afternoon in late October, when she had the day off and I was working from home, and she texted at noon saying, "I need to walk somewhere with actual leaves. Come with me." No question mark. Just a statement and an invitation folded inside each other. I said yes. I always said yes to Paula. I didn't think about why. We met at the main entrance at 2:00. She was there before me. She was always early, another thing I knew. Wearing a long olive-colored coat and that canvas bag with the wildflower print, and her dark hair loose around her shoulders. She was looking at something on her phone when I arrived, and when she glanced up and saw me coming, something changed in her face. It wasn't a big change. It was small. A softening, maybe. The way someone's expression shifts when they see a person they're genuinely glad to see. I noticed it, and I filed it away under. She's happy to see you. You're happy to see her. This is friendship. You're late, she said. By 2 minutes. That's late. That's punctual. She smiled. Come on. And we walked into the park together, into the light coming through the trees, into the afternoon that neither of us knew yet was going to change things. I need to tell you about the walk before I tell you about what happened at the end of it. Because what happened at the end didn't come from nowhere. It came from 2 hours of walking beside Paula through the park on that October afternoon, and from something that happened during those 2 hours that I've been trying to describe accurately to myself ever since. The park was almost empty of tourists at that time of year, that time of day. There were joggers and dog walkers, and a few other people who looked like they'd escaped from somewhere and needed air. The trees were at that peak of color, orange and rust and deep yellow, where you feel vaguely embarrassed by how beautiful something can be, like the natural world is showing off, and it's almost too much. Paula loved it immediately. She stopped twice in the first 20 minutes just to look up at the canopy. Not to take a photo, just to look. I stood beside her both times, watching her face more than the trees. There was something about watching Paula be moved by something. I don't know how to explain it without sounding like I'm being too dramatic about a person looking at autumn leaves. But there was a quality to her attention when she was genuinely affected by something, a certain stillness that I had always found, privately, beautiful. Something about the way she let herself actually feel things without packaging them first, without saying, "Look how moved I am." Just standing there, feeling it. I didn't say any of this to her. I looked at the trees and said something about how I never came here enough, which was true but wasn't the thought I was having. We started walking again. She asked about a project I was working on. She always remembered what I was working on, and I told her more than I usually told people. I told her about the frustrating part, the part where the client kept changing directions, the part where I was starting to lose the thread of what I'd actually wanted to make versus what I was being asked to make. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "I think you know what you want. I just think you're giving yourself permission to be confused because it feels less vulnerable than being clear." I stopped walking for a second. She looked at me. "Did I say something wrong?" "No," I said. "You said something exactly right. That's worse." She laughed, and the way she laughed, exhale, eyes crinkling, almost surprised, landed in me somewhere strange. I started walking again. We talked about other things. Her own project, which was going well. A book she'd been reading. Something Cassie had said last week. The way the light was moving. Small things, large things. The kind of conversation that weaves back and forth without needing to be anything in particular. And the whole time, the entire 2 hours, I was aware of her in a way I couldn't fully account for. Her hands when she gestured. The particular way she held her coffee cup when she was listening. The sound of her footsteps on the gravel. The fact that she smelled faintly of something warm, cedar or sandalwood or something from her coat. And that I noticed this and knew immediately that I had noticed it before, many times, without registering the noticing. This is the thing about awareness when it finally arrives. It arrives all at once, not new information. Old information, finally allowed to surface. I kept waiting for the feeling to pass, to normalize, to go back to the slightly blurred, background noise way I had experienced Paula for 4 years. It didn't. The more I tried to return to the familiar, the sharper everything got. She touched my arm at one point, briefly, just while saying something, the way friends do. And I had to actively manage my reaction. That was new. I had never had to manage my reaction to Paula touching my arm. We touched each other all the time the way friends do. A hand on a shoulder, an elbow in a crowd, the casual physical language of a friendship that has grown comfortable in itself. None of it had ever required management. I told myself, "You're tired. You've been working too hard. You're reading into things." I told myself, "She's your friend, and you love your friend, and that's a perfectly ordinary thing to feel on a beautiful afternoon in the park." I told myself all of this very carefully, and then I reached into her bag for the park map, and I found the photograph. There are moments in your life that you can point to afterward and say, that was the moment. Not when things changed, because things change slowly, in layers you don't see until later. But when you could no longer pretend you didn't know what was happening. Finding that photograph was my moment. I sat with it for maybe 30 seconds before I heard her coming back. 30 seconds where I looked at a picture of myself that someone I loved had been carrying around in her bag. A picture she had printed and folded and kept, quietly, without telling me. And felt something in my chest open up like a window I hadn't known was closed. Not certainty, not clarity. Something messier than that. Something that felt like, oh. Oh no. The O was recognition. The no was everything else. Because the thing about a moment like this is that it doesn't just show you something about the other person. It shows you something about yourself. What that photograph told me about Paula, I could reason about. I could find explanations, alternatives, ways to make it mean something simpler than what it clearly meant. What it told me about myself, I couldn't reason away at all. It told me that finding it mattered. It told me that my first feeling, before the confusion, before the reasoning, before the careful, I shouldn't jump to conclusions, was something warm, something that felt like being seen. It told me that part of me had been waiting, without knowing it, for exactly this kind of evidence, and that scared me more than anything else. Paula came back. I gave her the map. I kept my face as ordinary as I could make it, which meant it probably looked slightly off, because she glanced at me once in a way that wasn't quite casual. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just cold." She reached into her bag, the same bag, and pulled out a folded scarf, the slim kind she always carried, and she held it out to me without asking if I wanted it. I took it. I wrapped it around my neck. It smelled like cedar and sandalwood. I didn't say anything. She smiled and looked at the map. "There's a lake over there. Want to go?" "Sure," I said. And we walked toward the lake, with her scarf around my neck and a photograph of me folded into her bag, and I told myself I was fine, and almost believed it. We sat near the water for a while. The lake in Prospect Park in October has a particular quality of light. Silvery, slightly diffuse, the reflections of the trees moving in long vertical stripes when the wind picks up. We sat on a bench close to the water and drank what was left of our coffees and talked about things I can barely remember now. The conversation went somewhere funny, something about a neighbor of hers who kept leaving passive-aggressive notes in the elevator. And I laughed, genuinely, and felt for a moment like everything was normal. And then Paula said quietly, like she'd been thinking about it for a while, "I'm glad you came today. Not unusual. Friends say that, but the way she said it was slightly different from the way you say a thing that's filler. It had weight, like she meant more than the sentence." I looked at her. She was looking at the lake. "Me too," I said. She nodded. Didn't say anything else. I watched the side of her face, her profile against the silver light, and the orange trees and the moving water, and I thought, I have been looking at this face for 4 years, and I thought, when did it start feeling like this? Not the looking. The feeling. I didn't have an answer. I don't think there is one, really. Some feelings don't have a start date. They have a moment of recognition, and everything before that moment was the feeling, just unnamed. She turned and caught me looking. I should have looked away. I held it for 1 extra second. 2. Something I can't fully explain. Then I looked at the lake. "We should start heading back," I said. "It's getting cold." "Yeah." She stood and held out her hand to help me up, and I took it. She let go quickly. Ordinary. But I kept the warmth of it in my palm for the whole walk out of the park, and I kept it there when I went home, and I kept it there a long time after that. That night I sat in my kitchen for an hour without turning on a light. My cat Fern came and sat on the table and looked at me with the particular judgment of an animal who has seen you in all your states and is unimpressed by most of them. I thought about the photograph. I thought about her scarf, which I had kept. I hadn't meant to keep it. She hadn't asked for it back, and I hadn't offered. And at some point during the walk home, I had just stopped thinking about it, and then I was home with it still around my neck. It was on my kitchen counter now. I kept looking at it. I thought about the way she said, "I'm glad you came today," with that particular weight. And I thought, there are two possible explanations here. One is that I am wrong about all of this, that the photograph is a coincidence, or an artifact, the kind of digital detritus that gets printed without full intention. That the way she said that sentence is just the way she talks, and I am projecting significance onto ordinary kindness because something in me is looking for something and reading it into the nearest available source. The other is that I am not wrong. I sat with both possibilities for a long time. What frightened me, I realized, wasn't which one was true. What frightened me was realizing that I wanted one of them to be true. That was the part I wasn't ready for. Not the idea that Paula might feel something, but the idea that I wanted her to. I'd never let myself. I stopped that thought there, put it back, put the lid on it. Fern blinked at me slowly. I got up, turned on a light, made tea I didn't drink, went to bed too early. Lay there in the dark staring at the ceiling and told myself, tomorrow you will feel normal. Tomorrow you will have done whatever processing needs to happen, and you will go back to knowing exactly who Paula is and exactly who you are to each other. And this will have settled. It didn't settle. If anything, it got louder. In the days after the park, I became a very careful version of myself. I'm not sure I was aware of doing it at first, but I can see it now, looking back. The way I monitored my own reactions, edited my own impulses, made very deliberate choices about how and when and how much to be around Paula. I answered her texts a little slower than I normally would. Not coldly. I wasn't capable of cold toward her, even when I was trying. But with a small delay, a slight gathering of myself before I replied. Like I needed to check what I was about to say before I said it. I'm a little ashamed of that now. The deliberateness of it. The fact that I was managing something that felt too large and too real to be managed. She texted on the Thursday after the park to say she'd found a place that did really good banh mi, a few blocks from my apartment, and did I want to try it on Friday. Normal Paula, easy Paula. The Paula I'd known for 4 years who texted like this all the time, easy and practical and assuming that yes, of course we'd do the thing, which we usually did. I stared at the text for a long time. I typed, "Yes, sounds good, 1 o'clock." Then I deleted it. I typed, "I think I'm busy Friday. Can we do next week?" Then I deleted that too. I sat there with my phone in my hands and felt the strangeness of what I was doing. The fact that I was deliberating about whether to get lunch with my best friend, as if a sandwich had become something to be afraid of. I typed, "Yes, that sounds great. 1 o'clock?" Sent it. She replied immediately, "Perfect. I'll put it in my calendar. Very official banh mi appointment." And I laughed. Actually laughed alone in my apartment, at my phone. Which told me something I wasn't ready to think about directly. Friday came. The banh mi was very good. We ate it standing at the counter of a tiny place that had maybe 5 seats and a radio playing something old and Spanish from the kitchen. Paula ate with the focused pleasure she brought to food she liked. Unhurried, present, the kind of eating that's actually a form of attention. I watched her more than I ate. I thought, this is the same. This is exactly the same as it's always been, and you are the one who has changed. She looked up and caught me watching. I hadn't looked away in time. "What?" she said. "Nothing. This is good." She gave me a look, not suspicious, more like, "I hear you, but I'm not entirely convinced." And then she said, You seem a little somewhere else today. Work stuff, I said. She nodded, didn't push it. But she kept looking at me. In that way she had, for another half-second, before going back to her sandwich. That half-second felt like it lasted a while. After lunch, we walked a few blocks in the direction of the nearest train station, because the day had turned gray and cold, and neither of us felt like wandering. She had her scarf, a different one, a navy one, because I still had the other one, and she'd pulled it up over her chin against the wind. She looked warm and slightly bundled, and I wanted to say something to her that I didn't have the words for. At the corner where we'd split for our different trains, she stopped and turned to me. "Hey," she said. "Are you sure you're okay? Like, in general?" I looked at her face. The way she asked it, quietly, directly, without making it a big thing, but making it clear that she was asking it seriously, made something tighten in my throat. "Yeah," I said. "I'm okay." She held my eyes for a moment. "Okay," she said, like she was accepting this for now, not permanently, like she was filing it under. "I'll come back to this." Then she hugged me, the quick routine hug we always did at goodbyes, and turned toward her train. I watched her walk away. I thought, you could call after her. You could say her name right now, and she would turn around. I didn't. I walked to my train. I held onto the rail the whole ride and stared at the window and thought about the photograph. I thought about it being in her bag right now, folded between the map and the lip balm. Or maybe somewhere else by now. Maybe she'd taken it out. Maybe she'd noticed it was disturbed. Maybe she kept it somewhere specific, and I'd happened to find the one time it was in the bag. Maybe I was constructing an entire architecture of meaning out of a piece of paper. Maybe. But I had stopped being able to fully believe the maybe. 3 weeks after the park, something happened that I hadn't anticipated. B came to visit. Paula's friend from Philadelphia, the loud, warm one with the good outfits. She came for a weekend, stayed with Paula, and we all went out Friday night, Cassie and Diane included, to a restaurant in the East Village that Cassie had been waiting months to get a reservation at. I almost didn't go. I told myself it was because I was tired. The honest answer is that I was afraid of spending an evening watching Paula in a group context, which I'd been doing for years without incident, but which I now couldn't trust myself to do with my usual ease. I went. Because I missed her. Which was something I noticed only in going, that I had been keeping a slight distance, and that the slight distance had cost me something. The dinner was wonderful. The food was excellent. The conversation was warm and funny and the kind of thing that makes you remember why you have people in your life. Diane made a joke about her week that made everyone at the table laugh until they couldn't breathe. Cassie ordered wine with the careful authority she always brought to wine. B was B. Effervescent, affectionate, occasionally inappropriate in a way that was somehow never actually offensive. And Paula sat across from me, not next to me, across from me. I don't think she planned it. Or maybe she did. I'll never know. But we spent most of the evening with the length of the table between us. And I found myself, over and over, looking up from a conversation on my end and finding her looking up from one on her end. And then one of us would look away. After the third time, I stopped looking. I kept my attention firmly on whoever was talking to me, on the food, on anything except the opposite end of the table. After dinner, we went to a bar around the corner. The kind of narrow, crowded Brooklyn bar where everyone ends up standing closer than they normally would. Paula ended up beside me at some point. I wasn't tracking how it happened. And the bar was loud enough that you had to be close to hear each other. She leaned in to say something. I felt her breath near my ear. She was saying something about the music, something funny about the playlist, but I could barely track the words. I laughed at what I thought was the right moment. She smiled and pulled back slightly. "I like this song," she said, louder now. "Me too," I said. I had no idea what song was playing. She looked at me with a small, warm expression, like something was amused in her, privately. Then Bea appeared between us and grabbed Paula's arm about something, and Paula was pulled away, and I exhaled slowly and turned back to the bar. Cassie appeared beside me. "You good?" she asked. "Great," I said. "Why does everyone keep asking me that?" She gave me the look she reserved for when she thought you were being obtuse. "No reason," she said, and ordered another round. The next morning I found the scarf. I say, found it, as if I didn't know where it was. I knew exactly where it was. I had moved it from the kitchen counter to the back of a chair in my bedroom, and then from there to a small wicker basket by the door where I kept things I kept meaning to return to people. And there it was. I picked it up. It still smelled faintly of cedar. I sat down on my bed with it in my hands, and I thought, very clearly and with a calm that surprised me, I am in love with my best friend. Not have feelings for. Not something like love. Not a complicated thing that I can reason around. In love. The recognition landed quietly. No drama. No accompanying music. Just me, sitting on my bed with a borrowed scarf in the morning light, looking at a fact about myself that I had been walking around for months, maybe longer, and only now allowing to have its actual name. I sat with it for a long time. Then I folded the scarf carefully and put it in the basket by the door and thought, okay. What now? The answer for a while was nothing, which I know sounds like a cop-out. Maybe it was, but I want to be honest about the state I was in, because it wasn't like having a feeling and then deciding to suppress it. It was more like having a feeling, naming it, and then not knowing what any of the other facts around it were. I didn't know if Paula felt anything. I had the photograph. I had the weight in her voice when she said she was glad I came. I had the way she looked at me across a restaurant table. I had 100 small things that could add up to something or could add up to nothing, depending on whether the person interpreting them was reasonable or fooling herself. I wasn't sure which one I was being. And beyond that, beyond what Paula felt or didn't feel, I had myself to reckon with. The fact that this hadn't happened to me before, not like this. I'd had friendships with women that felt important. I'd had attractions that I hadn't known how to categorize and had filed away under. Complicated, deal with later. I'd had a relationship in my early 20s that hadn't worked, and a few since then that had worked fine but quietly, without this particular quality of vividness. I'd always thought of myself as someone for whom love arrived gently and reasonably, a thing you built, not a thing you fell into. What I felt about Paula didn't feel like building. It felt like standing at the edge of something high and realizing the drop is real. I called my sister Maya one evening in November. Maya is 3 years older than me, lives in Chicago, and has an instinct for the truth of things that I both rely on and find occasionally terrifying. She's the person I call when I can't tell the difference between overthinking and actually thinking. I didn't tell her about Paula specifically. I told her, in slightly roundabout terms, that I was having some feelings I wasn't sure what to do with. She listened. She asked a few questions, careful ones the way she does. And then she said, "Is this the friend you're always talking about?" I said, "I talk about a lot of friends." She said, "No, you don't." A long pause. "Yeah," I said. "It's that friend." Another pause. "Well," she said, "what are you going to do about it?" I said I didn't know. She said, "You do, though. You're just scared." I said, "Profoundly." She said, "Yeah, that makes sense. It's a big thing." And then, after a moment, do you think she... "I don't know," I said. "Okay," she said. "You don't have to know everything at once. But I think you need to stop trying to keep this contained. It's not that kind of thing." She wasn't wrong. It wasn't. and trying to keep it contained wasn't working. It was just making everything slightly airless, making every interaction with Paula slightly formal, slightly careful, in a way that was creating distance where there had never been distance before. She noticed. She hadn't pushed it, but she noticed. I could tell by the way she'd started texting me differently, with a tiny bit more space than before, like she was matching my energy without understanding why mine had changed. I didn't want that. I didn't want distance from Paula. The irony being that what I feared, ruining what we had, was what I was already doing by being afraid of ruining it. We had dinner at her apartment in late November. She cooked. She was a better cook than she ever made much of. Matter of fact about it, unhurried. The way she was unhurried about most things she was actually good at. She'd made pasta, something with mushrooms and a bit of cream and fresh thyme, and her apartment smelled warmly of it when I came in. The apartment was small, but well organized. Books she'd actually read, plants that were actually alive, a print above the sofa that she'd gotten from a gallery in Park Slope, a geometric abstraction in ochre and dark blue that I'd commented on the first time I saw it and remembered still. Her cat, Olive, regarded me from the windowsill with practiced indifference. We ate at her small kitchen table, close because the table was small, and talked about things that felt, that night, freighted with something I couldn't name directly. She'd been dealing with something difficult at work, a project that had gone sideways in a way that wasn't her fault, but had been partly blamed on her anyway. She talked about it with more openness than she usually did. The hurt of it. The way being treated unfairly can make you question your own competence, even when you know, rationally, that it was the system and not you. I listened. I said what felt honest. I told her she was one of the most competent people I knew, and that I meant that not as a reflex compliment, but as an actual observation accumulated over years of watching her work. She went quiet for a moment after that, a specific kind of quiet, the kind that means something has actually landed. "Thank you," she said. "That means a lot. You mean a lot." She said it simply, like stating a fact. The room was quiet. The candle on the table flickered. Olive jumped down from the windowsill and walked through the kitchen with majestic irrelevance. I thought, now. Say something now. I didn't say anything. We cleaned up together. She washed. I dried. The ordinary choreography of two people who had done this before. She handed me a bowl, and our hands overlapped for a second, and I was immediately and completely aware of it. She didn't pull her hand back right away either. We both stood there, half holding the same bowl, for a second too long. Then she let go. Turned back to the sink. "There's chocolate for later," she said. "The good kind." "Obviously," I said. My voice sounded normal, steady. A small miracle. We sat on her couch after. She put something on in the background. Not TV, music, low and ambient. We talked less now, easier and quieter, the way you can with someone you know well enough not to need to fill everything. At some point, without planning it, I picked up her scarf from where it was draped over the arm of the couch. The navy one, not the other one. "I still have your other scarf," I said. She looked at me. "I know. I should give it back." "You don't have to," she said. And then she was quiet again. And I was quiet. And neither of us said anything about the scarf, which was not about the scarf. I left around 11. At the door, she held the hug a beat longer than usual. Not dramatically. Just a beat. On the subway home, I put my forehead against the cold glass of the window. What was I doing? More to the point, what were we doing? Because the distance between what was spoken and what was present in every room we were in was becoming something I could barely hold. It had weight. It had texture. It pressed against things. I had spent years loving Paula as a friend, and I would still, I would always love Paula as a friend. That wasn't in question. But there was a second thing now, underneath the first thing, and it had been underneath it for a while. And the longer I didn't name it, the heavier it got. The question wasn't whether I was going to say something. The question was when, and what, and whether I was going to survive the saying. In the first week of December, things shifted. Not dramatically. There wasn't a fight or a confrontation or any of the narrative escalations you might expect. What happened was subtler than that, and in some ways more difficult. Paula pulled back. Slightly. Just slightly. The texts that usually came easily started coming with a bit more space. An invitation she'd typically extend was mentioned as a thing that happened without me in it. A Wednesday we usually spent together came and went without a plan. It wasn't coldness. She wasn't being distant or unkind. But the particular warmth, that frequency she'd been on for months, leaning toward me, offering her scarves, sitting across the table and looking up when I looked up, had dialed down a fraction. And I noticed it immediately, the way you notice a temperature change in a room you've been in for a long time. It could mean, she picked up on the awkwardness I'd been carrying and she's giving me space. It could mean, she felt something and it frightened her. It could mean, I am still wrong about everything and reading entirely too much into completely ordinary fluctuations in a normal friendship. I went back and forth between these for days. What I didn't do was reach out, which was its own kind of choice, or its own kind of cowardice, depending on how honest I was willing to be with myself. Cassie texted me one afternoon, a simple enough text. "How are you doing? Haven't seen you much lately." I wrote back that I was fine, just busy. She replied, "Okay, but also, and I say this with love, I notice things. Come have coffee with me." I went. She didn't ask anything directly. That's Cassie's way. She talks about other things, good things, things that have nothing to do with what she actually wants to discuss, until you can't help talking about it yourself. By the time we'd been at the coffee shop for 40 minutes, I had told her most of it. Not all of it. But most. She listened in the careful way that Cassie has when she's taking something seriously. Not jumping in. Not offering solutions. Just holding what you're saying. When I was done, she said, "I've thought this for a while, for what it's worth. About how you two are together." I asked what she meant. She said, "You orbit each other. You always have. I've watched you do it for years. I don't know. I thought you both just knew and it was one of those things. But apparently not." I sat with that for a moment. "Did you ever say anything to her?" "It wasn't mine to say." I nodded. "She pulled back a little, didn't she?" Cassie said. Not a question. "Yeah." She was quiet. "I think she might be scared too." "That doesn't solve anything." "No," she said. "But it might change the math." The math, as Cassie put it, changed on a Sunday in mid-December. It snowed that morning. Not a lot, just enough to make everything slightly quieter, slightly softer-edged. I was working at my desk, or trying to, when my phone lit up with a text from Paula. It said, "I think I've been weird lately. I'm sorry. Can we talk?" I stared at it. The "can we talk" from a friend can mean many things, most of them frightening. The instinct was to protect myself, to assume the worst and construct a defense. But I was so tired of the distance, so tired of managing myself around her. I typed, "Yes." "When?" She said, "Today? If that's okay." I said, "Come over." She arrived an hour later. She was wearing the olive coat, same as the park. She had snow in her hair, not much, just a trace of it. And she looked, I don't know. She looked like herself. Like the Paula I'd known for 4 years and loved in quiet increments, and only recently started letting myself call it by its name. I made tea. She sat at my kitchen table. Fern appeared and jumped onto the chair next to her, which Fern rarely did with anyone, and Paula automatically put her hand down for Fern to sniff, and Fern bumped her head against Paula's fingers, and I thought, my cat, too. Of course. I've been in my head, Paula said. So have I. A pause. I found the photograph, I said. I hadn't planned to say it. It came out before I could stop it. She went very still. When? She said. At the park, in your bag. I was looking for the map. She looked down at the table. A long moment. When she looked up, there was something in her face that I had never seen there before. Something exposed, slightly braced, like she was waiting for whatever came next and wasn't sure she was ready for it. I'm not sure what to say, she said. You don't have to say anything, I said. I needed you to know I found it. Because I think we've both been doing this thing where we don't say the thing and I can't. I'm running out of space to not say it. She was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I started to think I'd made a terrible mistake. That this was the moment the ground came out from under me. That she was going to say, calmly and kindly, that the photograph meant something different than what I thought, and that we were friends, and she hoped we'd always be friends. And that... I've had that photo for 2 years, she said. My breath stopped. I took it at Cassie's birthday. You were laughing and you looked. She stopped. Started again. I printed it because I couldn't stop looking at it on my phone, and I didn't know what to do with that, so I thought if I had it on paper it would feel less... I don't know. Less like something I was hiding. But you were hiding it, I said. Yes. She looked at me. I was hiding it from you specifically. Fern jumped down from her chair and walked out of the kitchen with total indifference to the situation. Paula's hands were flat on my kitchen table. I looked at them. I'd noticed her hands 1,000 times. The long fingers, the ring she wore on her right hand that had been her grandmother's. I think I've been in love with you for a long time, she said. And I didn't know how to exist in that. Because... She paused. Because you're my best friend. And I didn't want to be wrong. I didn't want to be wrong about what I was feeling or wrong about what you might feel, and You've been wrong about one of those things, I said. She looked at me. What you're feeling, I said. You're not wrong about that. She breathed out. Slow. Like she'd been holding it. And for a moment, we just looked at each other across my kitchen table, in the quiet of a snowy Sunday, with the tea getting cold and Fern's footsteps receding somewhere down the hall. Everything was very still. But before I tell you what happened next, if you've been with me this far, you know what this feeling is. That particular weight in the chest. The thing you've been carrying quietly for months, and suddenly you're in a room with it, and there's nowhere left to look. If this story is touching something in you, click the like button right now. That's what tells me to keep making stories like this one. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe and hit the bell, so you never miss when a new one drops. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever found something? A photo, a message, a thing you weren't supposed to see, that changed the way you understood what someone felt about you? What did you do with that knowledge? Tell me. I read every single one. And where are you watching from today? Tell me your city. I'll put a heart on every one I see. Okay, back to Renai's and Paula. What happened next was not a declaration of love in the clean, cinematic way you might expect. What happened was, I picked up her scarf from the basket by the door, and I brought it to the kitchen, and I put it on the table between us. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked at me. I've been meaning to give it back, I said. She didn't say anything for a second. Then she said quietly, I know you have. I keep not doing it. I know. Another silence. But this one felt different from the silences of the last few months. It wasn't a silence that was hiding something. It was a silence that was containing something large and careful and real, that neither of us wanted to damage by saying the wrong thing. "I don't know what I'm doing," I said. "I want you to know that. I haven't done this before. Not like this." She said, "What do you mean, like this?" "With a friend," I said. "With someone with you, this specific thing." She was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen on her face before, or maybe I'd seen it and not let myself register it. Something open, something quiet, and waiting. "I've been trying to go back," I said, "to where I was before the park, before the photograph. I kept thinking if I gave myself time, it would recalibrate, back to normal." "Did it?" she asked. "No." "Same," she said. The snow was still coming down outside. I could see it through the window over her shoulder, slow and without urgency. "I'm scared," I said. "Yeah," she said. "Me too." "Of what? For you?" I asked. "What are you scared of?" She thought about it. Really thought, which was the kind of person she was. She didn't answer questions like this quickly. That it won't. That whatever this is, if we go toward it, it changes what we have. Even if it goes well, it changes it. "It does," I said. "It already did." She nodded. Slowly. "Yeah. So the choice isn't between change and no change," I said. "We're already past that." She looked at me for a long moment. "You've been thinking about this," she said. "For months," I said. "You?" "For longer than I'd like to admit." Something settled in me. Not resolution. Not the comfortable settling of something answered. The steadier kind. The settling of having the real thing in front of you, instead of the version you've been carrying in your head. "I'm still scared," I said. "I know." She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Light, deliberate. Not casual the way friends touch each other. Deliberate. "I know you are, and I'm not asking you to not be scared." I looked at her hand on mine. I thought about the park. About the light through the trees and the way she'd stood and looked up without taking a photo. About the photograph she'd carried for 2 years. About every text and dinner and ordinary afternoon that had been, I now understood, already saturated with this thing, this specific feeling, that neither of us had been saying. "What do we do?" I asked. She said, "I don't know exactly, but I know I don't want to keep pretending I don't feel what I feel." A pause. "And I think you feel something too, even if you're not sure what to call it yet." "I know what to call it," I said. She looked at me. "I just didn't know I was allowed to call it that," I said. Her hand tightened slightly on mine. Not much. Just a fraction. "You are," she said. And I believed her. The following weeks are hard to narrate simply because what happened in them wasn't a single thing. It was a series of small things. A renegotiation, slowly and with great care, of who we were to each other. We talked more than we ever had. Not more frequently. We'd always talked frequently, but more honestly. With fewer of the small evasions that you don't notice you're making until you stop making them. I told her things I'd been holding for months. She told me things I hadn't known she'd been carrying. It turned out there were 2 full years of her caring about me, in a way she'd never named. Not from dishonesty, from uncertainty. From the same fear I'd had. That she might be wrong. That she might lose what we had. That the leap was too far, and the landing wasn't guaranteed. She'd been in a relationship before, years ago, with a woman. It had ended hard, not because of the relationship's fundamental nature, but because of 1,000 other things. Life circumstances, bad timing, Two people who loved each other but couldn't make the geography and the futures work. She'd spent a long time after that being careful, loving people from a slight distance, just enough distance to feel safe. With me, she said, she'd gotten closer than she'd meant to, and by the time she noticed, it was too late to pull back without it hurting. I understood this exactly. We didn't move quickly. I want to be honest about that. There was no dramatic night where everything changed. There was a gradual warming, a slow removal of the barriers we'd each built for our own reasons. We kept being friends. We kept having lunch and going to museums and talking too long in her kitchen. But there was something different underneath all of it. Something acknowledged. Something present that didn't need to hide anymore. She came over one evening in January and brought groceries without asking. Made dinner while I finished a work call, moving around my kitchen with the ease of someone who'd been there before, which she had many times, but not like this. Not with this permission, this warmth that was mutual and named. I came out from my desk and she handed me a glass of wine and said, 30 more minutes, meaning the food. And I stood in my kitchen doorway and felt something I hadn't had a word for before, and now did. Home, not the apartment, her. That particular quality of ease and warmth and rightness. The feeling of arriving somewhere. We had dinner and talked for hours, and she stayed late and left sometime around midnight, and at my door I held the hug a beat longer than usual, me, this time, holding it. And she pressed her cheek briefly against mine. "Hi," she said quietly, like it was a different kind of greeting, like she was saying it for the first time. "Hi," I said back. She went home. I closed the door, leaned against it, and felt the thing I'd been trying not to feel for months, now just felt. But I have to tell you the other part too, because this is a story that asks you to hold two things at once, and I want to be honest about both of them. The other part is that it wasn't simple, that the joy of having something finally named had a shadow underneath it, and the shadow was real. Paula and I were in love with each other. I say that now with the quiet certainty of someone who has sat with it for long enough to know it's true, and not something I've talked myself into. I knew it in January. I knew it more in February. And I also knew, in February, that something was wrong. Not with us, with her. She started having trouble sleeping. I knew this because she mentioned it, and then mentioned it again, and then I started to be able to hear it in her voice when we talked. A thin quality, an exhaustion underneath the familiar warmth. She'd been dealing with something at work that had gotten worse. The project that had been unfairly blamed on her had continued to be a source of stress, had spread into other areas of her professional life, had made her question things about her future there that she hadn't wanted to question. And beyond work, something else. Something she talked around before she finally talked about it directly. Her mother was sick. Not urgently, not in crisis, but sick in the slow, grinding way that some illnesses work. The kind that doesn't announce itself as a catastrophe all at once, but slowly changes everything. Her mother was in Philadelphia, not far, but not here. And Paula was making trips she hadn't made before, spending weekends away, coming back on Sunday nights tired in a way that wasn't only physical. She told me about it on a Tuesday in February at her apartment. The two of us on her couch with Olive between us, and she talked about her mother in a way she'd never talked about her before. With grief that was anticipatory, which is its own particular kind. The grief you do in advance, while the person is still here, because you can see where things are going. I listened. I didn't try to fix it, because it wasn't fixable. I just stayed. And she cried a little, which she did quietly, like she did most things, not performing grief, just having it, there, in the space between us. I put my arm around her and she leaned into me and we sat there for a while. "I feel like I'm carrying it alone," she said, "even when I'm with people." "You're not alone right now," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "I know." Another moment. That's the only thing that's been easy, she said. Being with you. That's been the easiest thing. And I felt that in my chest like a bell. March came slowly, then fast. One Thursday, she called me. Not texted, called, which she did sometimes, but less often than most people. She was primarily a texter, and so a call had a particular significance. I answered. She said, "I need to tell you something." The quality of those words, the way they were shaped. I sat down. Okay. She told me that she had been offered a job. A good one. A really good one. A creative director position at a studio in Chicago, a place she'd respected for years, an offer that had come through channels she'd been involved with before things at her current job got difficult. She was thinking about taking it. Chicago. I knew what Chicago meant practically. I had a sister there. I knew the city. I knew the life there was possible. But I also knew what Chicago meant in the context of this thing, this newly named and newly present thing that was 4 years old, and also 4 months old, and also somehow entirely fresh. Paula, that's incredible, I said, because it was. I know. Her voice was careful. When would you go? If I take it, May. 11 weeks. I sat in my apartment with the phone and felt the particular sensation of holding two completely incompatible feelings in the same body. Pride, happiness, the genuine desire for her to have something this good, and underneath, a cold, specific grief. What do you want to do? I said. I want to take it, she said. I think I need to take it. A pause. And I need to be honest with you about the fact that part of why I'm telling you first, before I've told anyone else, is because of what things are between us. What they might be. I don't want to make a decision like this without including you in it. I wouldn't want you not to take it because of me, I said. I know you wouldn't, she said. That's not exactly what I'm saying. I thought about what she was saying. She was saying, this is real, what we have. Real enough that it changes the weight of decisions. Real enough that you are the first person she wanted to tell. And she was also saying, what do we do about the fact that real isn't the same as easy? I need some time to think, I said. Not a lot. Just a few days. Take all the time you need, she said. After we hung up, I sat very still for a long time. Then I went to the wicker basket by the door and took out her scarf, the original one, the cedar-smelling one from the park, and I held it in my hands. Those few days. I will tell you something about those few days that I've never quite put into words before. During them, I understood something about love that I hadn't fully understood before. That the thing you love, you want to be free, not abstractly, concretely. You want it to be free even when the freedom costs you something, even when the freedom takes it somewhere you can't follow easily. Because if you love a person, and I loved Paula, I loved her not just with the recent named feeling, but with 4 years of accumulated quiet love, the kind you build in Post-it notes and lunch specials and borrowed scarves and thousands of ordinary moments. Then what you want for her is the thing that will let her be most fully herself. And the job was that. The job and the move and the change. The chance to leave something that had been grinding her down, to be somewhere new, to have the kind of work that she deserved. That was the thing that would let her be most fully herself. And her mother was in Philadelphia, only 2 hours from Chicago. This was the geography of the right choice, even when the right choice was painful. I called Maya. She picked up in her kitchen. I could hear her kids somewhere in the background. And I told her what had happened and what I was thinking. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You've already decided." "Have I?" "You're describing the reasons it makes sense for her to go. You're not describing the reasons you want her to stay." She was right. I hadn't said anything about what I wanted. I had been talking entirely about her. That's not cowardice, by the way, Maya said. Just to be clear, that's a different thing. That's choosing her even when it costs you. It's going to cost me a lot, I said. Yeah, she said. It is. Paula and I had our last dinner together before her move on a Saturday in late April. Not the last time we'd see each other. We'd see each other again. There would be visits, I told myself. There would be calls. There would be all the ways that people who care about each other stay present across distance. But the last dinner of the life we'd had, the last evening of the particular geography of our friendship, her in Carroll Gardens, me in Crown Heights, 30 minutes apart, easy. She made pasta again. The same recipe she'd made in November, mushrooms and cream and fresh thyme, her apartment warm with the smell of it. Olive was on the windowsill. The print was still on the wall in the ochre and dark blue. We didn't talk about the move much. We'd talked about it plenty in the preceding weeks. We'd talked about what it meant, and what it didn't mean, and what we hoped for, and what we were afraid of, with the openness that had become characteristic of us since December. That particular honesty, the version of ourselves we'd been waiting to be with each other. We talked about other things, stupid things, funny things. I told her about something that had happened at my favorite coffee place on Tuesday, and she laughed in the way she laughed. Exhale, eyes crinkling, slightly surprised. I memorized it. I was memorizing everything that night, I think. The way she moved around her kitchen, the gesture she made when she was making a point, the sound her voice made when she was saying something she found genuinely interesting. After dinner, we sat on the couch. Olive came and sat between us in the way she had at some point started to, like she'd decided I was acceptable finally, after months of probationary sniffing. Paula put her feet up on the coffee table, and I leaned my head back against the cushions, and we were quiet for a while. The kind of quiet that doesn't need filling. At some point she said softly, "I'm going to miss this." "This," I said. "This. You. This specific thing." She was looking at the ceiling. I know we'll talk. I know you'll visit. I know this isn't ending. But this version of it. A pause. I'll miss this version. I thought about what to say. I didn't try to make it easier than it was. We'd promised each other honesty. Me too, I said. So much. She turned her head to look at me. I turned mine to look at her. We were close, the way you get sitting on a small couch together, and the lamp across the room was warm and low. "I'm not sorry we named it," she said. "Neither am I." Even though, I said. She reached over and held my hand. Not the brief, overlapping bowl version, really held it. Fingers intertwined, easy and certain. We stayed like that for a while. The lamp made everything soft. Olive purred somewhere between us. I thought about the park in October, the light through the trees, the photograph I'd found in her bag. I thought about the weight in her voice when she said she was glad I came. I thought about every text I'd reread and every dinner I'd lingered at and every moment I'd told myself I was rationalizing something that was very simple. I thought about December in my kitchen, snow outside the window, her hand on mine across the table. I've had that photo for 2 years. I thought, this love exists. It exists completely. Whether or not it can be the thing it might have been if the geography had been different, if the timing had been different, if any of the surrounding facts had arranged themselves differently, it exists. The love is real. The love is real. That's not nothing. That's not a consolation prize. That's the whole thing. I love you, I said, quietly, not as a declaration requiring response. Just as a fact I needed to say out loud. She tightened her hand on mine. I love you, she said, not as an echo, as its own thing. We sat there for a long time. At midnight, I got up to go. At the door, her door, The door I'd walked through dozens of times in 4 years in every season. She held me. Longer than usual. Longer than the park hug. Longer than November. Longer than any of the measuring I'd been doing, unconsciously, all those months. I held her back. Neither of us said anything else. There wasn't anything else to say. I went down the stairs, out onto the street. The air was April cool and smelled like spring, the specific New York spring smell of earth and rain and something almost like flowers from the gardens along the block. I didn't let myself look back at her window. I walked to the subway. I sat down. I held onto the rail. And then, on the ride home, for the first time in months, I let myself cry. Not the gasping, dramatic kind. The quiet kind. The kind that happens when something is genuinely over. When you're not fighting it or running from it or convincing yourself it will be otherwise. When you are simply present to the fact of the loss. And it is real. And it is yours. And it is worth the crying. I cried for the whole ride home. And then I stopped. Dried my face. Walked the block from the station to my apartment. Let myself in. Fern was waiting in the hallway. Because Fern always knew. I sat down on the kitchen floor, and Fern climbed into my lap, and I sat there for a long time, not trying to fix it, not trying to feel different, just being in it, the fullness of it, the grief and the love and the fact that they were the same thing, that you couldn't separate them, that the size of the loss was exactly the size of what I'd had. I had loved Paula. I had let myself love her, finally. After all those months of not letting myself, and the love had been exactly as true and as large as I had suspected it was, and it had changed me, and she had changed me, and that was real. That would stay real even when she was in Chicago, and I was here, and the specific geography of our friendship had rearranged itself into something different. I thought about what Maya had said, that choosing her wasn't cowardice, that it was a different thing. I thought, this is what it costs to love someone honestly, not just the good parts, the full cost. I sat on the kitchen floor until I was ready to get up. Then I got up. In the weeks after Paula moved, something happened that I hadn't expected. I started to be less afraid. Not because the loss had resolved or diminished. It hadn't. I missed her the way you miss something specific and irreplaceable, with a particularity that doesn't generalize into general sadness, but stays specific. I missed her laugh. I missed the sound of her at a door. I missed the way she handed me things. I missed the quiet of being in the same room. But the fear that had been with me since October, the fear that had made me slow my texts, and avoid the thing and try to contain what clearly could not be contained, that had quieted. Because the thing I'd been afraid of had happened. I had loved someone in a way I hadn't loved anyone before, and it had not fit easily into the shape I'd imagined for my life, and I had told her the truth of it, and she had told me the truth of hers, and the thing had been real, and then it had changed, and I had survived the changing. More than survived. There was something in me that felt, I don't know how to say this without it sounding small, clearer. Like I'd been walking with something tight around my chest without knowing it was there, and now it was gone. I understood something about myself. Something I'd spent years quietly filing away under complicated, deal with later. I'd dealt with it now. It was still complicated, and I was still figuring out what it meant for who I was and how I moved through the world. But I wasn't running from it. I was just myself, the fuller version. Paula and I called twice a week, on average. Sometimes more. The calls were long, longer than most people's calls, because we talked the way we'd always talked. The distance rearranged the form of things, but not the substance. She told me about Chicago, about the job, about the apartment she was settling into, about how strange and exciting it was to be somewhere new. She told me about her mother, too, the visits to Philadelphia, the slow and difficult process of watching someone change and staying present to it. I told her about work, which was going better, about Cassie and Diane and the ongoing drama of the restaurant they'd been trying to get into for months, about Fern, who had developed an inexplicable obsession with a particular windowsill and would sit there for hours. We talked the way we always had, easy and layered and honest. She came back to New York in June for a weekend. We had dinner with Cassie and Diane, and then, afterward, we walked. Just the two of us. Through Carroll Gardens, past her old building, through the small park near the water where we sometimes went on summer evenings. The night was warm and light in the particular way of New York in June. The sky still slightly lit at 9, the streets full of people who didn't want the day to end. She looked different. She looked lighter, like something in the new place had given her something back. "You look good," I said. "I feel good," she said, with something like surprise. "Actually good. I forgot what that was like." "I'm glad," I said, and I meant it entirely. We walked for a long time. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. We stopped at a place for ice cream and ate it standing up because the line was too long to wait for a table. She laughed at something I said, and I laughed at something she said, and at some point I thought, this is what it becomes. Not the loss of what was, the becoming of something else. Different from the first 4 years. Different from the November through April of love that couldn't quite land. But still hers and mine. Still this specific frequency. She left Sunday morning. I went with her to the station. At the platform, she hugged me. And I held it, and she held it, and neither of us rushed. "Come visit," she said. "Chicago is actually good." "You're going to make me say that," I said. "I am." She smiled. The particular smile. "Soon," I said. She nodded. She got on the train. I waited on the platform until the train moved. Then I walked back up into the June morning. There's a thing that happens after a love like this. After something you let yourself have and then let go. You find the things it left in you. Not the grief, though the grief is there. Specific and real and worth honoring. But the other things. The things you didn't have before and now do. I had been afraid for so long of the very nature of what I felt. Afraid of what it said about me and what it meant, and how to hold it, and who to be inside it. Paula had given me something extraordinary. Not just the love itself, but the practice of loving her. Of being honest about it. Of letting it exist in the full light of named things. I was not the same person I'd been in October. Not better exactly. Though, in some ways, yes. Just more true to myself. The part of me that had been locked was unlocked. The part that had been filed under later was present. I thought about the photograph sometimes. The one she'd carried for 2 years. It still existed somewhere. In her new apartment in Chicago, maybe. In some drawer or corner. A picture of me mid-laugh at a birthday dinner, completely unaware. And I thought, she saw something in that moment. Something worth keeping. I could let that be what it was. Something real. Something that had its time and its truth. Something that changed us both. That's enough. That's more than most things get to be. I didn't get everything I thought I wanted. I got something more honest. I got the experience of loving someone fully. Not from behind the careful distance of almost. Not with the brakes on. Not with one hand on the door. But fully. The way love asks you to. The way it can transform you even when it doesn't stay. Paula is in Chicago. We talk twice a week. I'm going in August. She already found a restaurant she says I have to try, and knowing her, she printed a map. I love her still. Differently than in November. Differently than in October. But still. The park, the photograph, the scarf that still smells faintly of cedar. They belong to me now. Not as evidence of something lost, but as proof of something real. If this story touched you, if you've carried something like this too, if you know the weight of a love you didn't know how to name, write "So Dade" in the comments. That's how I'll know you stayed with me till the end. And if you want more stories that feel like this, honest and real, and a little bit painful in the way true things are, click the next video on your screen. There's something waiting for you there. Thank you for being here. A big hug from me, and until next time.